armed protesters went door-to-door through a Johannesburg township, forcing suspected foreign nationals from their homes and handing some over to police. According to Reuters journalists at the scene, even a woman and her young child were caught up in the operation. The dramatic scenes have reignited fears of xenophobic violence in South Africa and sparked concern across the continent. But how did tensions reach this point, and what could happen next? South Africa has struggled with anti-immigration tensions for years, but recent weeks have seen the issue escalate. Activist groups have blamed undocumented migrants for rising unemployment, crime, and pressure on public services. They issued what they called a June 30 deadline for undocumented migrants to leave the country, warning that protests would continue if their demands were ignored. In response, thousands of people reportedly left South Africa out of fear. Malawi says around 38,000 of its citizens have returned home, while Zimbabwe says more than 60,000 have also gone back in recent weeks. Now, those tensions have spilled onto the streets. On Thursday, July 9th, journalists witnessed anti-immigration protesters carrying out coordinated door-to-door searches in Alexandra, a township north of Johannesburg. Armed with wooden sticks and carrying South African flags, members of the group moved from house to house, forcing open doors in search of people they believed were living in the country illegally. Some of those they found were escorted to waiting police vehicles. Among those caught up in the operation was a woman and her young child from Malawi. The incident quickly drew attention because it highlighted the human cost of the growing unrest. Families who had been living quietly in their communities suddenly found themselves at the center of a politically charged confrontation. One Zimbabwean man challenged the protesters, insisting that he was legally allowed to live and work in South Africa under a Zimbabwe exemption permit, commonly known as a ZEP. The permit allows thousands of Zimbabwean nationals to remain in South Africa legally, making his detention one of several examples that raise questions about whether legal residents were also being targeted during the searches. The demonstrations were not limited to Alexandra. In Soweto, another large group marched through the streets carrying sticks and South African flags. Flyers promoting the day's events had described them as peaceful marches, but they also openly announced plans to conduct door-to-door searches for undocumented migrants afterward. Similar demonstrations were reported in Durban, showing that the movement had spread beyond a single neighborhood. Some organizers defended the campaign publicly. Community leader Bongani Msomi said the group was moving from house to house, removing foreign nationals from local communities. Supporters argue that undocumented immigration has placed enormous pressure on jobs, housing, healthcare, and public services. Critics, however, warn that civilians have no legal authority to enforce immigration laws and that these actions risk encouraging mob justice instead of due process. The protests are closely linked to a movement known as March and March, led by former radio presenter Jacinta Ngobese-Zuma. She has become one of the most recognizable figures behind the anti-immigration campaign. After nationwide demonstrations on June 30th, she told supporters that protests would continue every Thursday until the group's demands were met. Those demands include stricter border controls, mass deportations of undocumented migrants, and giving South African citizens priority access to schools, healthcare, and other public services. Supporters say these measures are necessary to protect local communities during a period of high unemployment and economic hardship. Human rights organizations, however, argue that blaming migrants for the country's economic problems risks fueling discrimination and violence. The movement has continued to grow despite growing concern from civil society groups. Earlier demonstrations were largely peaceful, but they were also accompanied by reports of looting and deadly clashes linked to anti-immigration unrest. As the latest door-to-door operations unfolded, pressure quickly shifted to the South African government, with many asking whether authorities could restore order while protecting the rights of everyone living in the country, regardless of nationality or immigration status. The impact of these events extends far beyond Johannesburg. What began as localized anti-immigration protests is now raising concerns across Southern Africa and among African communities around the world. Aid organizations warn that many of the people affected are not undocumented migrants at all. According to Doctors Without Borders, also known as MSF, some lawful residents, refugees, and asylum seekers have also been caught up in the violence. The organization says even patients seeking medical treatment have been turned away simply because they were identified as foreigners. It estimates that xenophobic violence has displaced tens of thousands of people and forced many families to flee their homes in search of safety. For many Africans, these scenes are deeply troubling. South Africa has long been viewed as one of the continent's largest economic hubs, attracting people from neighboring countries in search of work and better opportunities. But for thousands of migrant families, those opportunities are now being overshadowed by fear and uncertainty. The latest unrest is already having regional consequences. Malawi says around 38,000 of its citizens have returned home in recent weeks because of safety concerns. Zimbabwe says more than 60,000 of its nationals have also gone back in recent weeks. Reports also indicate that hundreds of Nigerians have left South Africa amid growing fears over their security. The Nigerian government has previously condemned attacks on its citizens and has demanded greater protection for Nigerians living in South Africa. Earlier this year, Nigeria also began assisting some of its citizens who wanted to return home following previous outbreaks of violence. Those earlier incidents had already strained relations between the two countries, and this latest wave of unrest risks adding new pressure to those diplomatic ties. Across the African diaspora, the developments have sparked difficult conversations. Families with loved ones living in South Africa are closely following the situation, while many are asking how communities that have lived side by side for decades reached this level of tension. At the heart of the debate are issues that affect many countries across the continent: unemployment, rising living costs, border security, migration, and economic inequality. While many South Africans argue that illegal immigration places additional strain on already limited resources, human rights groups warn that frustration over economic conditions should never become an excuse for targeting people based on their nationality or background. As international attention grows, several African governments have advised their citizens in South Africa to remain cautious. Ghana has appealed to the African Union over attacks involving one of its nationals, while Mozambique has also engaged South African authorities as regional leaders monitor developments closely. Inside South Africa, opinions remain deeply divided. Some residents sympathize with protesters, saying years of unemployment and slow economic growth have left many communities feeling abandoned. Others strongly condemn the demonstrations, arguing that immigration enforcement is the responsibility of the state, not civilian groups carrying out searches in neighborhoods. President Cyril Ramaphosa has acknowledged public frustration over unemployment and illegal immigration. At the same time, he has warned that no one has the right to take immigration enforcement into their own hands. His government has announced additional measures aimed at strengthening the country's immigration system, including plans for improved biometric registration and specialized immigration courts. Authorities have also stepped up operations targeting undocumented migrants, while promising to prevent further vigilante violence. Meanwhile, life remains uncertain for many migrant families. Some businesses owned by foreign nationals have temporarily closed their doors, while others have relocated out of fear of further attacks. Police say they will continue monitoring planned demonstrations in an effort to prevent more violence, but organizers have indicated they intend to continue protesting until their demands are addressed. Analysts warn that unless South Africa makes progress in tackling unemployment and economic hardship, tensions could continue to grow. For now, one question remains unanswered. Will the government succeed in restoring order while protecting the rights of everyone living in South Africa? Or will the divide over immigration continue to deepen in the weeks ahead? We'll continue following this story as more verified information becomes available. If you found this report informative, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for trusted coverage of Africa's biggest stories. And now, we'd like to hear from you. Do you believe South Africa should focus primarily on stronger border enforcement, or should tackling unemployment and economic inequality be the top priority? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation respectfully. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next report.